Hi, everyone. This is Jim, and I am doing this as an experiment with Google Hangouts on air, uh, and also to provide hopefully a little relief from what might be a slightly terrifying infographic that Noel sent out on my request this morning to all of you. In terms of the Google Hangouts, what's neat about this is that I can broadcast it on air to, nobody listening. It gets recorded on YouTube, and I can then send it to you through Google and presumably through email also. And you can then watch it whenever it makes sense. It also looks like we can do our group on Google Hangouts, because then the sessions can be recorded. And if someone misses the session, as Steve and Abby did yesterday, they can then tune in and see what was the conversation. Let me talk a bit about the infographic. And do it first with a little background, a few comments. First, the Wilber system is very complicated, and it ties into other very complicated systems. And this is not necessary to know about in order to engage the model as we're trying to see what actually pops out to us, not so much about precisely presented and organized model, but what just, calls us, has resonance with us. So, for example, the levels, which are in the middle of the chart, and, it looks like, pretty much on the left side too. The levels that we are using in the model that was discussed this week has 8 levels. Depending on how you count this has varying numbers of levels. So let's look at the central graphic and just work up it. The infrared that we got in our Superhuman OS audio is the same as shown, magenta the same, red the same, amber the same. Orange is the same. On the other hand, it's broken down into 2 phases of orange, which is the more refined model. Green is the same as we had discussed in Superhuman OS. Teal, the beginning of second tier, is a level or a sub-level of second tier that is shown here and not covered in the Superhuman OS. Turquoise is presented here as second tier. Indigo and violet and ultraviolet of third tier were not presented, and third tier was discussed as simply, super integral or clear light. So if you look at the right of this central graphic, you can see essentially, with some differences, the same as we were given. Going over to almost to the left, the spiral dynamics listing, that's pretty comparative in terms of levels until you get up to second tier. They have 2 levels in second tier, as does the graphic, but our course only has the turquoise, and that would be similar to a kind of a combination of the two spiral dynamic levels on the left. Spiral dynamics was developed by a very smart gentleman, Don Beck, who is now a key associate of Ken in the Integral Institute. And his focus was on not the individual, but on the cultural, in his word was, as we've all probably heard, cultural memes. And what fascinated Ken back in the early days of this model, by which I mean the mid to late 80s, was that the individual levels that he had collected from the various developmental educators and psychologists were very similar to what had shown up for Don Beck in his study of the group or the collective developmental memes. In terms of other elements on this graphic, lines of development is on the bottom right, connected into states of consciousness, which we're covering this week. And they've chosen to sort of connect the various states that are presented here, the various lines of development with particular states of consciousness, which is an interesting idea. In other words, the gross state, which we're going to learn beginning late this afternoon, is the physical awake, the way we are most of every day, most of our lives. We are in the gross state, which is the awake physical state. And the lines of development that they put into that state, are the cognitive, the self, the emotional, and relational. And when you get into the subtle, the subtle state is the dream state. Subtle energies are the dreamy energies, and also connected to just emotions or the heart. So that's where they put the moral, the spiritual, the sexuality, and a little surprising to me, they put the kinesthetic, which is the body intelligence. That's in the subtle state in this image, which means it's a little connected to emotion, to intuitional moving images, to and not just to measurable, how far did I throw that discus? The causal state is the the deep sleep when you are non-dreaming. It's the emptiness state. And in there they have put what? They put aesthetics and other states that the intuition. How strong is your intuition capacity? Well, that's considered something that arises out of the deep interior, sort of empty place in us, and which in the state languaging is the causal state. The non-dual state, and again, this is perfectly correct in accordance with tradition. Non-dual is the place where form, things that are measurable, meet the formless, that which is invisible and completely unmeasurable, and they become one in the non-dual state. We will hear more about that in today's module that will be released. So here they're connecting lines and states. If you go up to the upper right, That is called the 4-quadrant model. That's the core of Ken's model. And this will be presented to us over the next 8 weeks. But Ken's whole insight is that everything is either, shows up in these 4 faces. You're either individual or in a group, but actually I've said that incorrectly. You are both and always an individual and a member of a group. And at every level, you have an interior and an exterior. And there are, at these 4 quadrants, developmental levels that we have just engaged in the earlier discussion and our talk yesterday. Going over to the left, you'll see types. We'll have an installation module on types. His model, AQAL, which is pronounced AQUAL, which is this whole map, it means all quadrants, all lines, all levels, and it actually continues all states and all types. So a type means masculine or feminine. A type might be a Jungian kind of archetype. It might be the Myers-Briggs types. The Enneagram is a method of identifying types. What is your type, your personal tendencies? So the argument of Wilber's developmental model is that we develop through levels, and we begin as a particular type. We start at level 0, and with 4 quadrants, in other words, our body, our interiors, and we are always connected in some way to a collective. So there's an individual and a collective part, and we can be type-wise, male or female. We could, from birth, we might be extroverted, introverted, have a tendency to certain ways of processing, deciding, and then acting. And that we then move through our individual lines of growth, and we grow through development of our cognitive ability at school. We go through the development of self-line as we develop a personality, how we're going to be in the world, our emotions, our ability to understand ourselves and others and groups, and to manage conflicts, grow over time. And some of the level growth from the bottom infrared up through today in the United States, probably up through orange, is pretty well connected in a strong national public school system, is connected to age. The infrared is the first couple of years, magenta is the next few years, red will go up into just preteen. Teen will go up. I mean, the amber traditional rule roll will go sometimes into late teens, and as we know, sometimes we'll go through the whole life. And orange comes in with, simplistically, as we head off towards college and leaving home, leaving the womb, leaving the nest, leaving the peer group, starting the new adventure, but most of all based on the cognitive capacities that have been developed, moving from concrete decision making and dealing with concrete stuff in a very linear way to the ability to deal with complex topics, to deal with what ifs, as ifs, look at possibilities, and do scenario planning based on here are the 3 possible scenarios and which one is the most attractive to me based on selected criteria. So that is what happens. The great and, to me, absolutely stunning insight of Ken is that this development doesn't stop unless we decide or by default don't pursue our own development. One teacher presented it this way. He said, actually it was a she said, I now believe in the asteroid theory of adult educational and consciousness development, by which she meant after we get to be orange and get to be grown up and have our roles in the world beginning to, be defined, there's no more need to grow because we're done, right? As she said, unless we're not. But most of us, many of us, if not most of us, will stay cozy if we're cozy. And so we don't then change often after adulthood unless we are knocked off center by some asteroid that forces us to re-look at all the assumptions that we've been going on. And some people simply choose to grow, understand that growth is possible, and choose to continue to develop. And here are, through the map and through the work of Ken in collecting evidence from all the traditions, are examples of ways to continue the development into green and then a second tier. So that is all for now. I will send you all the link to this, and hope this all works out for all you guys. Thanks much.